Welcome to Right Side of the Brain, the arts and health podcast created by Interact Stroke Support. Our guest this week is the critically acclaimed writer, playwright and screenwriter Nell Dunn. Nell is known especially for a volume of short stories, Up the Junction, the novel Poor Cow, both of which were turned into seminal films in the late 1960s. Nell's most recent novel, Muse, a memoir of love at first sight, is now available at all good bookshops and internet sites. This interview was recorded during the period of the lockdown. Nell Dunn, a very, very warm welcome to Right Side of the Brain.
Thank you, Nirjay.
So, Nell, if we could start at the very beginning, could we know a little bit more about you? Could you tell us about your childhood, where you were born, what your parents did for a living, etc.?
Yes. I grew up beneath the Marlborough Downs in Wiltshire, and my parents were farmers, and so I grew up very much with dogs and ponies and animals all around me. Mm-hmm. And then my father took me to see Augustus John, the painter. Mm-hmm. And I immediately fell in love with the sort of bohemian atmosphere. And he did a drawing of me, and fed me pink marshmallows. And his lovely wife took me to pick strawberries, and she wore a straw hat and a long blue dress. And I thought, yes, this is the life. I don't want farm anymore. I want the bohemian life.
So, Nell, are you saying that had your father not taken you to see Augustus John, you may have had a very, very different life indeed?
Yes, I think I am saying that. I think we need our eyes opening to the different possibilities that life has to offer.
So, what were your early aspirations as a younger person, Nell?
I think first I wanted to be an art historian, and I went to the Courtauld Institute. Mm-hmm. To study art history. But then I let that go and started writing quite young. And it took me 7 years of writing to get anything published. I just would send things in and they'd come back. And in those days you sent them in with a brown envelope and your address on it and stamps for them to send back.
Yeah.
And that's what happened for a long time. But eventually I got something published, and then I felt I was a writer and could devote my time to being a writer.
So when you first started, Nell, when you were sending these stories off to publishers and they were being sent back to you, were these short stories?
I wrote a television drama, which I was really pleased with and got sent back. Mm-hmm. And I wrote fiction pieces, and I also wrote realistic pieces, which eventually became Up the Junction, my first book. Mm-hmm. And they were real life pieces about what was going on around me, and serious pieces. And mm-hmm. That's what I began to publish.
And when did you move from the Wiltshire countryside to South London?
Probably not till I was about 20, and then I got there quite by chance. Just found a little cottage that I fell in love with, mm-hmm. and just moved. Was determined to move, mm-hmm. and I didn't want to be a housewife. And the house I'd been living in was big, and the expectation where I'd spend my time dusting, And I thought I'd rather spend my time writing. I was always interested in reality and social realism, really. And there were at that time there were a lot of social realist painters around, like John Bradby. Mm-hmm. And I think I felt quite in tune with that social reality.
And Nell, was this during the time of what we know as kitchen sink drama with regards to theatre?
Absolutely that. But I started by writing stories of kitchen sink drama, and then moving on. And it took me a long time to get to have a play on. 1981, and I first published in 63, so there's quite a big gap. and I sort of moved on to plays.
Nell, could you tell us about your creative journey which led up to Up the Junction? Because I think that, as I recall, you actually worked in a sweet factory, and if my memory serves me right, McCrindle's sweet factory is where the three main characters in Up the Junction work. So,
Yes.
so was that the basis of where Up the Junction came from, your experiences of working there?
In fact, in Battersea, there were lots of tiny factories at that time, which is the end of the 50s. There was a butter factory and a sweet factory and these little factories. And it was a very lively place. There were, the betting on horses was illegal, but round every corner you'd see a man making a signal, take a bet from you. And so it was quite, I can't get the word when people go transgressive kind of thing, if that word makes any sense.
Yeah.
And it was just so different from Wiltshire, from farm on the Wiltshire Downs, beneath the Wiltshire Downs. It was such a different world that I got very enchanted by the use, sounds so pompous that to say it, but by the use of language. It was so vivid.
It seems to me that, when I read Up the Junction and Poor Cow, that these two works are quite rightly regarded as very, very important pieces of work, seminal pieces, particularly in the exploration of women's lives, and especially working class women. So could you talk about this theme, because it does seem to be a major element of your writing?
Yes, well, I am a bit puzzled why I should be so caught up in working class women's lives. I don't think I have an answer, but mainly I think I was attracted to the exuberance and the language and the courage that those women had to have fun and make you laugh. And
it's almost as if it's a language of its own, that the culture of 1960s working class London. Would that be a fair analysis?
Yes, and this ability to have fun seemed to me very, very precious. Like, coming back from washing all the clothes together in the baths, in the municipal baths, there'd always be somehow some fun, getting some fish and chips and sharing it, or very alive, I think, very alive. And the opposite to me was being very kind of pompous and goody-goody and, generally uptight.
Yes. Do you think part of that is economic? And what I mean by that is that, if you are, a little bit more well off as a person, you can plan, you can save income for the future. But if you don't have that much money, you sort of live for the moment, so to speak.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. You just live for the moment and make your fun as you go along. Don't quite know how to put that better. But there's a sort of freedom. There's a sort of freedom which comes with spontaneity.
Yes.
And not being full of rules, and also an immense amount of kindness.
Yes.
I encountered.
Now, with regards to that spontaneity and that sort of, you used a lovely word, that sort of transgressive aroma, that existed during that time. Do you think that we've lost that, or do you think that still permeates, within our culture?
I think we've lost it a bit, really. Yes, I do think we have. Life is extremely stressful if you haven't got any money. So I suppose putting your mind to, having a good job and things is completely understandable and right. Yeah. So I don't quite know
I was just fascinated by your description of that sort of transgressive world where
Yes,
people, they're not necessarily going to follow rules and
no,
follow orders and stuff like that. And I was just wondering whether I find that quite exciting because it pushes the envelope.
yes,
And it's
yes.
it's quite creative in many ways. A lot of creativity comes from there, and so I just wonder whether we've lost something of that.
Well, there always was a kind of finger pointing, disapproving person, if you see what I mean.
Hmm.
So I don't think, I think we go on battling to make our lives livable, really. And part of that is having fun and having fun with each other and making each other laugh. So I don't think it's gone completely, but
Nell, I'm very keen to get your opinion because you've written so beautifully, particularly about the lives of women. I'm very keen to know: do you feel that the depiction of women within the arts has changed for the better since you started writing?
I'm not sure I can answer. I'm not sure I know, Nirjay. I did read, just talking about individual books, I read Deborah Orr's book, Motherwell, about growing up a tough working class background in north of England.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those lives are still going on, really, and possibly more as you go further north.
I was wondering, in terms of say the empowerment of women. Do you feel that there's more women now in positions of power within the arts?
Well, I think there definitely are, but women are always going to have it in a difficult space because they want their babies and they want to look after their babies,
mm-hmm.
and therefore, to a certain extent, they've got to find a man who's prepared to support that.
Yes.
And that is one of their chief aims in life.
Yeah.
To find someone who wants to have babies with them and will look after them while they have them.
Yeah.
So it's never completely straightforward. But I think women have come a long way.
Yes.
In getting. I wish that they somehow band together and stop the transgression into their lives when men treat them badly. That's still not sorted.
Yeah. Could I ask you, as someone who's a very well respected writer, were you always a reader?
I was a reader. I was a terrific reader.
Uh-huh.
From about 13, I suppose.
Uh-huh.
Because there's nothing to do in the country once you've ridden your pony and tidied up, done your stint with the hens.
Well, yeah, there's cows to milk now.
Yeah,
there's eggs to sort out. And,
exactly, and dairy floor to hose down.
The pigs to swill, and there's a lot of work to be done.
There's a lot of work to be done, but not much. Not much brain work.
Did you have any favourite authors?
Well, I think I read the classics. I read the good old George Eliot and Jane Austen, and I loved the classics.
Yeah,
that's what I read.
Yeah,
and funnily enough, the Russian classics too, in translation. I didn't speak Russian, but I loved them. I love reading.
I did a podcast with the writer Alan McCormick, and
I know Alan.
Yeah, and I asked him if he was a big reader, and he said no. And
really?
I'm always fascinated by whether writers were big readers before they became writers. Could you tell us about how your work became converted to film and television, particularly how did the collaboration with Ken Loach come about?
Collaboration with Ken Loach came about because a friend of mine called Christopher Logue, dead now, a poet, had a play on at the Royal Court called Lily White Boys. And I used to hang about a bit at the Royal Court because I was also in love with theatre. Mm-hmm. Christopher had a composer friend called Stanley Myers who'd worked with Ken at the BBC, and Christopher and he thought Ken should read it and do it up the Junction, that was.
Mm-hmm.
And so they gave it to Ken. And he hadn't actually directed a film before, but it was August and everybody was away, so he thought he'd managed to get it in.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all done very quickly.
Ken Loach's directorial debut is Nell Dunn's Up the Junction.
That's right.
Well,
that's right.
That's a good feather in your cap, Nell.
It was a very happy time, you know. I show him all the little locations in Up Junction, him filming, and we just got on with it. I wrote the thing, and he directed it, and it was fun, you know. We were both quite kind of young and free, if you know what I mean. You know, just not burdened by heavy. And the BBC was all on holiday because it was August. So, and Carol was great, and it was fun. And I think it has a sense of fun at the Junction. However dark it is at moments, it also has a sense of fun with the girls.
Could you tell us about the genesis of Poor Cow?
Well, Poor Cow, I've just written a book called The Muse, which has just come out last week. Mm-hmm. And it's about meeting the young woman who was to become Poor Cow in the book. So the book is really about her and her adventures. I don't quite know why it's got to be in the 100 books that sign the age, something. But yes, it's based on a particular real, and I became more and more real life. You know, as my writing went on, I was more and more interested in capturing reality.
This is the central character.
And you're talking about a book, Nirjay. You're talking about a book I wrote 50 years ago. I can't totally remember.
It is such a seminal piece of work, which was then turned into another film, I believe.
Yes.
I think in about 67, 68 or something like that.
67. I think it was 67.
And was it
then?
Carol White and Terence Stamp? Am I right?
Yes.
Thinking it was those two? One thing I have been fascinated by is, and you did briefly mention this earlier, why was there such a huge gap between the beginning of your writing career and the beginning of your playwriting career?
Oh, I think I know what it was. I wrote 3 books which were failures in that they didn't do at all well. And that's when I decided to write a play. And I then wrote Steaming. So I'd written 3 books actually in between that were not right. But I think that's probably part of most writers' journeys. They go down a path which nobody likes. And that's why I thought, well, blow this. I'm going to write a play.
And where did the idea come from?
The idea for Steaming. Well, I was quite involved they were shutting down the bars in Fulham. And I got incensed with rage about that because it was a real working class meeting place where people went to do their laundry and have a bath. They were lovely kind of wooden cubicles with great big baths. And you had a proper bath, you know. And people didn't have proper baths in their houses. Not everybody. I mean, obviously some people did. And it was a place to get together, and the old people got together there. And it seemed terrible. And actually they built a horrible swimming pool, so very plasticky, and that was closed down because it was too expensive to run. So that lovely old-fashioned one.
Yes, this is the story of the women who basically decide to fight against the closure
That's right.
of that particular steam room.
Yeah, I went to lots of council meetings and got the gist, and then wrote a play once again from real information.
Yes. You wrote a fantastic play now, if you don't mind me saying, called Lost and Found. Which is a play about stroke.
Oh, thank you, Nirjay.
And so I wanted to ask you about that, because I found it very, very informative for myself, particularly what people find about themselves after they've had a stroke. I've heard this said to me so many times from stroke survivors, and I always think of your play and how it really resonated with so many of us. I'm very interested first, how did you get involved initially with Interact, and what made you write that particular play?
Well, I got involved with Interact because Caroline Smith directed a play of mine in Ipswich, a play called Sisters, where two sisters shoot their father. And she did a most fabulous production. And then a little bit later on, she said, would I like to join in with Interact? So that's how it happened.
And tell us about Lost and Found now.
And Lost and Found came about because Caroline said, perhaps would I write something for Interact? And I wrote Lost and Found. I mean, I remember meeting people who'd had strokes and trying to understand what it was like in Lost and Found, and then writing Lost and Found about what it was like, really.
I think I saw it read at Tristram Bates Theatre.
That's right.
And I remember so many people, particularly people who had a stroke, saying how much it resonated with them.
Oh, that's lovely to hear, Nirjay. It really means a lot.
Nell, tell us about your latest work, The Muse.
Well, The Muse is really about Josie, she's called, a character I met in 1953 or something.
Who's the sort of central character of Poor Cow?
It was the character of Poor Cow.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a story around her life, really. And it seemed to hit some kind of nerve because people liked it, you know. But actually it's fairly simple. It just follows the life of a young working class woman who has the gift of the gab, really. She's got a way of talking about. And she's the centre of her life, too. That's the other thing. She's very important to herself. That's always interested me, slightly narcissistic. It often quite lights people up, you know, because they're sort of fascinated by themselves.
Yes.
And it's quite interesting, yeah, because you know, it's against the rules. We're not meant to be narcissistic, you know. So it's quite. I found her interesting. Let's put it that way.
This came out a couple of weeks ago, didn't it? Nell, we're recording this still during the period of the partial lockdown. The Muse is out at the moment. People can get the Muse at all good bookshops. They can get it online via Amazon, etc. What is the next thing that Nell Dunn is looking to explore?
I think she's resting on the sofa. Oh, Nirjay, I don't know is the answer. I really don't know. I'm quite tired, you know.
Yeah.
I'm quite old. And maybe I've got to just sort of hang out.
Yeah. Yeah, well, go
to book clubs and have a nice time.
That's absolutely fair enough. Fair enough.
Eat ice cream.
Well, Nell, you are a complete inspiration to so many of us. You are such a wonderful writer, and you have been a real stalwart and champion of Interact. So thank you so much for agreeing to this particular podcast for Right Side of the Brain.
Well, Nirjay, I would just like to say that Interact has meant an awful lot to me and has, done a huge amount for me. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. That was Nell Dunn. For more information on our work, please do visit our website at www.interactStrokeSupport.org. And if you're feeling generous, please do click on the big red donate button. We very much look forward to your company on the next edition of Right Side of the Brain.